Hello, holy brothers and sisters. Welcome to our 11th shiur of Chayei Moharan. Shechianu v'kiyumanu, Baruch Hashem. I hope you all had a beautiful, meaningful, and inspiring Pesach. This is the first shiur we're recording post Yom Tif, so I hope you all had a fantastic Chag. So, as always, our learning tonight is in memory of my maternal grandparents, Menachem ben Dovid Zvi and Illana bas Sarah. And our learning here is, as we should know by now, we're several weeks into this series, that we're not just here to explore the history and text that is in the Sefer of Chayei Moharan, which mostly discusses the life of Rebbe Nachman, but also many of his travels and some of his ideas. But we're also here to draw practical advice for our lives as chassidim, as followers of Rebbe Nachman, to strive and to grow and to come closer to the tzaddik and ultimately Hashem, because that is the whole purpose. For today's lesson, we're going to be learning lesson 113, continuing on in the Sefer. If you have your own copy of Chayei Moharan, that's going to be page Kuf Lamed Vav in this Sefer. And if you're following along in the English, which is the BRI version of tzaddik, we are going to be on page 39. As we've discussed in previous shiurim, this Sefer does not necessarily go in exact order of Rabbi Nachman's life. Not all the events that are recorded here are in chronological order. And that sort of mirrors the Torah itself, because it says, Ein mukdam u'mu'achar b'Torah, that not necessarily is there an exact order to the Torah. Are some events recorded in different orders, and that's the divine way that Hashem intended. And like here in this Sefer, according to the way Rebbe Nachman has organized this Sefer, not everything in Rabbi Nachman's life here is recorded in exact order. So where we're continuing on today follows Rebbe Nachman's trip to Eretz Yisrael. And if you're familiar at all with Breslov minhagim, one of the minhagim in Breslov and as in other Hasidic communities as well, is that on Acharon Shel Pesach, look at this is mamish divine right here. This is Hashgacha Pratis because we're coming out of Pesach. And one of the minhagim that many Breslovers and Chassidim have on Acharon Shel Pesach, the last day of Pesach, is to read over the story of the Baal Shem Tov's trip attempting to reach Eretz Yisrael. And infamously, it's known that Rabbi Nachman actually did not make it to Eretz Yisrael. He got very close, but unfortunately had to turn back. And I highly recommend you check out that story. For the purpose of this year, we're not necessarily going to go over it. But Rabbi Nachman himself also journeyed to Eretz Yisrael and actually made it to the shores of the Holy Land and spent some time there. The Baal Shem Tov, when he journeyed to Eretz Yisrael, he was accompanied by his daughter Adol, along with his attendant named Hirsch Sofer, and the three of them traveled together. And similarly, when Rabbi Nachman traveled, he was joined by his own daughter, also named Adol, after Rabbi Nachman's grandmother, who was the Baal Shem Tov's daughter. So that journey sort of mirrored each other. And one of the reasons why Rabbi Nachman says that his great-great-grandfather didn't merit to get to Eretz Yisrael is because to reach the state of Eretz Yisrael, which is on a level of godless to godless, one needs to be in a state of extreme katnus, smallness, and reach this level to be able to aspire to the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. And the Baal Shem Tov was not able to lower himself to these low levels that Rabbi Nachman is explaining, but Rabbi Nachman says that he himself was able to do that. And I won't go into too much depth, because in the coming weeks, in Mirz Hashem, we're going to see that story for ourselves, and it's going to be a very, very exciting trip that we ourselves will take to be able to discover Rabbi Nachman's trip to the Holy Land. So, without further ado, let's begin tonight's lesson, and we'll see what Rebbe Nachman has in store for us, uncovering more of the life of Rabbi Nachman. So here we go. We're in Kuf Yud Gimel. Acher kach nasa mimedvedevka le'Eretz Yisrael. The paragraph here, as we mentioned, is taking place following the trip from Eretz Yisrael that Rebbe Nachman took with his daughter and his own attendant. And this was in the year 1798, or around 1799 approximately. And when he came back from Eretz Yisrael, Rebbe Nachman made a shidduch for his daughter Adol. And it was made with the great rabbi and chassid known as Morenu Harav Rabbi Avram Dov Zal. He's known as Rav Avram Dov. And he was Harav Av based in Tekilas Kodesh Chmelnik, and he was the Av based in the head of the court of Chmelnik. And on their way back from Eretz Yisrael, having come back from their long tumultuous journey, they settled for some time in the city of Medvedevka. I wanted to touch on one quick idea of the name Adol, which is very, very cool. So Adol, Rabbi Nachman's eldest daughter, was named after the Baal Shem Tov's own daughter, Rabbi Nachman's grandmother. And there's some very interesting similarities between these two figures. Firstly, the Baal Shem Tov himself came up with the name for Adol. It was divinely inspired from the pasuk in Devarim, which says Eish das Lamai. And if you take the first letters of those three words, Eish das Lamai, you get Aleph Dalet Lamed, which spells Adol. And this is where the Baal Shem Tov says that he drew the soul and the spirit of his daughter from this pasuk. And this pasuk is referring to the Torah itself. It says a fiery law from them. And this is where the life force, so to say, from Adol was divinely inspired and drawn from. And this is where the Baal Shem Tov got her name. So the Baal Shem Tov himself had a very, very close connection with his own daughter, almost considered like a chassid, so to say. She was very intelligent, had Ruach HaKodesh. There were stories of miracles that she herself was able to do, and even bested some of the Baal Shem Tov's most prized students, who they themselves were on very, very high spiritual levels. So Rebbe Adol was of great caliber. So this is a little bit of who Rabbi Nachman decided to name his own daughter after. And Rabbi Nachman himself had a very, very close connection with his own eldest daughter, mirroring that of the Baal Shem Tov. So their relationship was something very, very special. And the more we learn of the Sefer, the more we're going to uncover some of that. So I'm not going to go into too much depth now, because we will definitely be seeing more of that relationship. Continuing in the Sefer, Gam take of Bavoy Me'eretz Yisrael Nasa Lekihilas Kodesh Liadi. When they returned from the trip from Eretz Yisrael, on the way back, because they had to go all the way from Ukraine to Turkey. From Turkey, they had to catch a boat to Haifa, and then on their way back, they mirrored that trip on the way back, and that meant they passed through several towns and shtetls. And one of those towns, if you're familiar with Hasidic lore at all, you will recognize the name Liadi, because Laharav Chassid Hagoyin Hamafursa Morenu Harav Rabbi Shner Zalman Zecher Tzaddik V'Kodesh Livracha, who is from Liadi, the great Rabbi Rabbi Shner Zalman of blessed memory, known as the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Lubavitch. V'diber Harbe Me'inyan Anshe Yisrael, and Rabbi Nachman and the Alter Rebbe, they spoke at great length when they met in person on the people of Eretz Yisrael and the community and those that have settled in the Holy Land. And because at the time that Rabbi Nachman had been in Eretz Yisrael, he received a very warm reception from the holy Yidden that were living in the great land of Eretz Yisrael. Shiur Zalsham, because he himself was there, and when Rabbi Nachman had visited Liadi, the Alter Rebbe said that he should stay for some time, and that's what he did. Rabbi Nachman spent a little bit of time in Liadi. Not too much known is there, but What we do know about the Alter Rebbe and his life is quite a lot. The Alter Rebbe, not going too much depth, but just for a little bit of a historical background and a short biographical sketch. The Alter Rebbe, he's the author of the Sefer of Tanya, and he was a towering figure in both Hasidic thought and halacha. And he was a leading student of the Maggid of Mezrich, the Maggid of Mezrich being the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, and he developed his own system of Hasidic thought, which is grounded in deep intellect and spiritual understanding. And this method of thought is referred to as Chachma, Bina, and Das, otherwise known as Chabad. So if you ever wondered where the term Chabad comes from, it comes from this system of learning and understanding. And though he developed his own system, slightly different from the derech, the path of Breslov, he's mentioned here in this section. Many people ask, did the Alter Rebbe meet Rebbe Nachman? And here is physical textual proof that these two great giants in Chassidus actually did meet and have mutual respect and recognition for each other at the time. And in fact, the Alter Rebbe passed away in 1813, just 2 years, around the 2 years difference between Rabbi Nachman. So the two figures and what they did for the Hasidic world and their legacies lives on to this day with their tremendous impact. So Ashreinu, that the world merited to have these two tzaddikim in the world at the same exact time, and that we get to benefit from their impact. Interestingly enough, the Alter Rebbe was heavily involved in providing money to those living in Eretz Yisrael. And if anyone knows of the life of the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman, he was heavily persecuted by not only by other Yidden and what was known as the Misnagdim, those who were against Chassidus, but one of the reasons why he had so many accusations was because of his own love for Eretz Yisrael. And this is something, it's not written here, but definitely there was a bonding between Rebbe Nachman and the Alter Rebbe on the concept of the Holy Land, because the Alter Rebbe would give lots of money and send them with emissaries to the Holy Land in order to financially support the trailblazers who went to reestablish Eretz Yisrael after the long and tiring Galus, even in the years of the 1700s and 1800s. So there was tremendous work there that needed to be done, and the Alter Rebbe himself was funding the people who were there, pioneering and settling the land of Eretz Yisrael after having been gone for so long. In fact, the Alter Rebbe himself even attempted to make it to Eretz Yisrael, and those he was traveling with ended up continuing on the journey, but he felt that he had more work to be done in Chutz La'aretz and stayed in Russia while his friends and fellow Hasidic colleagues went on their way. So, short little anecdote there in terms of Hasidic history, but let's continue in what we're learning here. And regarding Rebbe Nachman's own trip to Eretz Yisrael, there's many stories that can be told from that travel, and we will get to it. And also on the journey back. Gam haya etzel harav hakadosh Menachem chamisha yamim koydem petirasei harav hanal. There was a great Rav by the name of, he was known as Harav HaKadosh Menachem. That was one of the names that he was referred to as known as Rabbi Mordechai of Neskhiz, and he was a renowned Hasidic tzaddik and halachic authority, also known as Rabbi Mordechai Shapiro, and he served as the Av Beis Din in several cities and was also widely respected for both his wisdom and piety, and he was a close disciple of Yechiel Michal of Zlotshov, and was deeply connected to the early Hasidic leaders. And in this lesson here, in Chayei Moharan, we're about to read how Rebbe Nachman rushed with great longing and urgency to visit Rabbi Mordechai in his final days on his way back from Eretz Yisrael. He heard that Rebbe Mordechai was really not doing well physically, and he wanted to be able to show some profound respect for him and honor in his last and final day. So this was one of the trips that Rebbe Nachman made on his way back from Eretz Yisrael on the way to Medvedevka. But Nasa Elav b'chipasin gadol, and Rebbe Nachman went in great haste. Gihai lahut v'nechbaz b'nisiyasai kidei l'matzav b'chaim chayusai. And Rebbe Nachman was anxious, and he went in a great hurry because he was worried whether he'd find Rabbi Mordechai still alive because of how sick he was. V'chein haya, and this is what happened. Sheba elav samach lehistalkosai, and Rabbi Nachman was able to meet up with him really close to his passing. V'goydel ha'ava v'simcha, and when he met him, there was this great love and this great happiness and joy from their meeting. Shahaya la'arava kadesh hanal mibias Rabbeinu Zal, from this greeting that Rabbi Nachman had with this Rebbe when he finally was able to meet up with him and saw him in his final days. Yefshar l'saper l'sha'er klal, and it's really difficult and impossible to even fully describe the love and affection and simcha that there was in this meetup. But Rebbe Nachman is going to do his best to describe what happened in those meetings. Ki harav anal haya mutal al eres devai b'choili kaved ma'od. Rabbi Mordechai of Neskhiz was very sick, and he was bedridden. He was really in a terrible physical state. Kasher haya mefursam b'fi kol, and this was at the time, because of how sick he was, it was very well known to the people of the town of this unfortunate state that he was in. V'chatzi shana ritzufim haya mutal mesugar b'cheder shaloi haya nichnas l'soiche shum or hashemesh. And because of the sickness that he had, he was bedridden and stuck in a room to the point where no light was allowed to be let in. It was completely darkened. Ki loy haya efshar loy lisbal afilu hanisnoitzos hashemesh. And even small streaks of light were not allowed into the room because of how sick Rabbi Mordechai was, and even he was so light sensitive from his illness that the room had to be completely darkened. And he wouldn't even move or leave this room. And he wasn't able to even eat anything that was cooked. Because of his sickness, he was so sensitive to even the smells that cooked food was too much for him. And even when they could get him to eat, they would have to blend his soup and mush it several times just for him to be able to ingest some sort of food to keep him going. And even people of his house were not allowed to bring in anything that was cooked because of his state, because he just couldn't stomach the smells. And Rabbi Mordechai, because of his sickness, this is the state that he was in, and he had great yisorim, great troubles. I don't want to touch on this topic too much, but something did just come up in my head, that often great people of significance and stature and very holy people, in fact, people who accomplish great things, often go through states of suffering. And we don't always understand why they do go through such situations. And from the outside, from our low levels of understanding, it seems unfair that great people have to go through such stages, and not to try and understand why people go through such suffering. But often that state of suffering is beyond our own comprehension and has to do with a deeper plan going on in the universe. Hashem has a plan for our souls, whether that is something that we went through in a previous life or a divine plan for us to go through in this world. For the coming world, there's a better plan for us in store. So it's unclear why Rebbe Mordechai of Neskhiz had to go through the suffering that he did. It's unclear why Rabbi Nachman himself had to go through such deep suffering, as we're going to learn in later weeks. But they did, and this was the state. Now, either we can go through our suffering with bitterness and depression and sadness, or we can go through it with simcha and happiness and joy. And it all has to do with our state of mind. And if our state of mind is in a place where we can go through our suffering with smile and a positive outlook, then that's some way to at least ease the burden that we're all going through. And we can see from the life of Rabbi Mordechai of Neskhiz, just from what we're learning over here, and from Rebbe Nachman's case as well. Rebbe Nachman, in his life, went through amazingly deep and difficult suffering and pain, but yet, coming out of it, he's the one that gave us the greatest advice, that it's a mitzvah to be happy always, and to absolutely, no matter what, never to despair. So if Rebbe Nachman can go through that situation and give us this amazingly beautiful advice, then that's something that we really need to pay attention to. And Ashreinu that we have such a tzaddik. How worthy are we, and how glorious is it to have such a tzaddik who's gone through such a situation, came out on the other end with the beautiful smile and love and affection that he had for Hashem and for his people, and to give us this advice. So just something to touch on as we continue to learn a little bit more about this Holy Rebbe's situation. Ukeshabar Rabbeinu Zal Etzlei, and when Rabbi Nachman came to the city of Neskhiz, where Rabbi Mordechai Shapiro was spending his last days, Hechaya Oisa Mamish, just Rabbeinu's presence showing up in this town brought life back to Rabbi Mordechai. V'tekef k'sheba ha'ish shel Rabbeinu Zal ubiser oisoi, and when the messenger who went slightly ahead of Rabbi Nachman to warn Rabbi Mordechai and his family of Rabbi Nachman's, I would say, approaching, that immediately brought life and simcha to Rabbi Mordechai. Rabbeinu Zal Yavai Etzlei Nismali Simcha Harav. The Rav was filled with great joy. And he himself said that Rabbi Nachman had brought some life back to him. And Rabbi Nachman was received with great honor and with great love. And it's impossible to fully count and put a number to the great love, affection, and honor that Rabbi Nachman was shown from his meeting. And the two of them, Rabbi Mordechai and Rabbi Nachman, discussed different concepts and spoke at great length. And this was heard from one of the attendants that was there at the time. Shedibur sham me'inyan mares v'chezyones shel tzaddikim amitim ma shechoizen u'masigin. And he heard that one of the things that they were talking about was, typical talk that tzaddikim and Rebbeim would talk about. They'd talk about visions, and they'd talk about different perceptions of tzaddikim, the things that tzaddikim see and witness in not only their physical life and what they're seeing, but also in a spiritual sense. So, v'dibur b'hamalach metat. And one of the things that they spoke about was this malach. In English, it's known as Metatron. In Hebrew, it's referred to as mem tes matat. So, a little bit of background. We're not going to get too deep into what this angel or who this angel is, but just want to provide some background. It's a very mysterious and exalted angel mentioned in Zohar and in the Gemara, and he's known as Metatron. One of the places that he's mentioned is Zohar Aleph, it's 181b, and then the Talmud Chulin, and there he's known as Sar Hapanim, the Prince of Divine Presence, or the Minister of Interior, if you want to refer to it that way in English terms. So this angel is often described to be one that's closest to Hashem's glory, and he's associated with leading souls, orchestrating celestial judgments, and in some sources he's also provided the role of overseeing Tichias HaMesim, which is the resurrection of the dead, which we'll see in Mirz Hashem very soon, before the time of Mashiach. And in this piece, that we're looking at here in Chayei Moharan, it appears that it comes in the context of visions and deep spiritual experiences, and this emphasizes the elevated level that these tzaddikim were at, and the ability that they could discuss these topics at great length due to their experiences in the spiritual realm. And we're going to see this a little bit more next week. There's a little bit of a machlokes that we're gonna cover. It's nice and juicy, but actually we're going to split this lesson up halfway. So we've got a little bit left to go for this week, and then we'll continue on from next week. But for now, we're continuing the sefer. Va'achar kach tziva harav HaKadosh yasu suda avurai bebeisoi daika. So even though Rebbe Mordechai was very, very sick, he wanted to make a suda, a meal for Rabbi Nachman in his honor, having come all the way to be able to see him in his final days. Even though Rebbe Mordechai, because of his sickness, he couldn't stand food, he couldn't stand the smell of it. Still, he wanted to make a great suda for Rabbi Nachman. Afal pikein ava ma kalkeles hashura. This is a beautiful line. This is from Bereshis Rabbah, and this phrase ava ma kalkeles hashura means that love breaks down barriers. And when you're truly in a state of great love and affection, this breaks any sort of boundaries. And when you're in that state, when you're in that mode, it really doesn't matter, and you can really accomplish great things. And because of this love and admiration that the two tzaddikim had for each other, Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Mordechai, it was fixed, and Rabbi Mordechai had to make a meal for Rabbi Nachman. So he made this su'uda for Rabbi Nachman. V'Rabbeinu Zal yashav b'roish v'harav hakadosh hanal heirim atzmai v'nichnas l'soich habayis levush b'malbush elyon shekorin chalat shel gildig gishtik. That's a beautiful phrase. So Rabbi Nachman, he sat at the head of the table, and Rabbi Mordechai, even though he was so sick, he came out of this room that had no lighting. It was dark. There was no sunlight ever let in, yet he insisted on coming to the table dressed in what was known in Yiddish as a gilden geshtik, pretty much known as a gold bekisha, which was only worn on special occasions. And he came and he sat at this table for the meal. And he came to sit down at the table in honor of Rabbi Nachman for coming to visit. And it was half a year since he had sat at a table for a meal, yet because of Rabbi Nachman's presence and the great love and admiration that they had for each other, he was able to leave the bedroom and come and sit at the table for the meal. And this was all for the honor of Rabbi Nachman. And even though he was in great sickness and he was coming close to the days of his passing, yet he was still able to come to the table. And Rabbi Nachman stayed for Shabbos. And the Rabbi Mordechai gave him great praise and really, really pressed him to want to come and stay Shabbos with them. And he wanted Rabbi Nachman to stay. For whatever reason, Rabbi Nachman didn't want to overstay his welcome, perhaps, or he felt that he didn't want to stay for Shabbos. And he kept pressing. And it seems, it appears to Reb Nosson, according to what he's writing here, according to his memory, that he actually did end up staying for Shabbos. Now we come to a great concept in Breslev, known as a pidyon. And a pidyon is a designated amount of money that one tzaddik can give to another tzaddik, or a chassid can give to his Rebbe. And the source for this idea within Breslov, one of the sources I should say, comes from Likutei Moharan Tinyana. That's the second part of Likutei Moharan, lesson 3. And there, Rebbe Nachman teaches the following. He says, through the tzaddik, everything is sweetened. And through the pidyon that is given to the tzaddik, judgments are nullified. And Rabbi Nachman, he links this idea of a tzaddik acting as a conduit between the person who needs this sort of redemption, spiritual redemption, and Shemayim in heaven, and taking this place of the person to receive and sweeten the harsh decrees that's on their behalf. So one's able to give money, a redemption for his soul that's given to the tzaddik, and in effect you're giving a part of yourself, and this enables the tzaddik to be able to work with that money that's given on behalf of your soul, and with the spiritual energy to be able to advocate for you on high. So this is exactly what Rebbe Mordechai did, and he gave him the amount of 10 golden coins. Rabbeinu Zal Hayaroya and Rabbi Nachman, he saw too that this money was distributed for tzedakah, and that this money was given as a pidyon for Rebbe Mordechai, whether this was in order to try and bring some sort of break some sort of divine decree to perhaps heal Rebbe Mordechai from his situation, or just to be able to give it on behalf of his soul. So shehu mucharach lechalek kol mamonai. In fact, Rebbe Mordechai wanted to distribute all the money that he had on his person. Aval zeh efshar v'chulei v'chulei. But Rabbi Nachman refused this and said that this was an impossibility, and did not want Rebbe Mordechai to actually distribute all his money for whatever reason, whether that was to keep it for his remaining family, or it's not really written here why Rebbe Nachman said that he shouldn't give all his money. However, the Haven Shehu Muchrach Listalik, but Rebbe Nachman from this understood that Rebbe Mordechai's days were unfortunately numbered. And shortly before Rebbe Mordechai passed away, Rebbe Nachman returned to his house in Medvedevka. Before we end this lesson, we still got about halfway to go in lesson 113, but it is a bit of a longer one, so I think we're going to split it up and continue that part next week. But as we've been saying, that Chayei Moharan is more than just a historical record, and I like to say that it's a fire and a lens into how a chassid should really live. And sometimes we have to look a little bit into the words to be able to pull out some of these ideas, but Rabbi Nachman really shows us the love that he had for every single yid, for his fellow tzaddikim, and shows us in his way of living how we too can live. And Rabbi Nachman lived with the deepest avodah, and even when he himself later on in his life was on his sickbed, he still showed us the way that a tzaddik can live. And his every act, his every word, and even his small glances carried the deepest of spiritual power. So may we absorb these lessons, not just intellectually, but with our whole hearts, and may that bring us even closer to the tzaddik and to Hashem Yisbarach. So, Ashreinu, thank you everybody who is listening to these shiurim. I myself am loving this journey that we are on, and I cannot wait to continue it along with you all. So, wishing you all a fantastic week. Hope you all had a beautiful Yom Tov of Pesach. And with that, I will see you for Shiur number 12 of Chayei Moharan, where we will be continuing in lesson Kuf Yud Gimel, lesson 113. So, take care, everybody.